Chapter 7. A Time Between Times. The batteries in his headlamp were starting to weaken, so Breck shut off the light to conserve what little energy was left for later. Climbing in the moonlight, he lost himself in the drum of his ice axes, and the rhythm of his crampons creaking in the ice was hypnotic. Where is the exit gully? He wondered, for he was high on the upper head wall, surrounded by steep, unclimbable flanks and 1,000-foot drop-offs. And he knew there was only one weakness in the unforgiving terrain that led to the summit ridge. He glanced at his altimeter, 26,000 feet. He was now in the death zone. Annapurna itself rose only a few hundred feet higher, but at such an extreme altitude. The lack of oxygen in the atmosphere is too hard on the body, and it begins to falter and strain and grasp for life. And Breck knew his movements, breathing, and thinking would inevitably suffer. Kyle certainly suffered on this very mountain. And though it was over in an instant for him, the passage of time had done little to alleviate the suffering of those who knew him. Stepping around a rocky bluff, he clicked on his headlamp for a moment to see what was hidden in the shadows and realized he was standing at the base of a steep chute lined with rock-hard ice, and realized he found the exit gully. The climbing looked straightforward, a simple matter after everything else. So Breck shut off his headlamp again and continued in darkness, swinging his axes mechanically. Perhaps a few minutes had passed, or a few hours, or an eon, or no time at all, but quite suddenly he reached the top of the gully and pulled himself onto a gentle apron of snow, so flat he could easily stand upright on both feet. And he did, and saw the final ridgeline stark and distinct in the moonlight. But whether it was close or far was difficult to gauge, but nonetheless, he felt sure the end was near. Placing one foot in front of the other, he moved on, and the world held its breath as it waited for him to reach the crest, a ghost-lit walkway through the stars. And he followed it until there was nowhere else to go. Suspended between earth and heaven, Breck found himself surrounded by a sea of great peaks, giants of the Himalaya, each one aglow in the astral light, each its own high presence, lost in dream, thought, and premonition, where the illusion of being comes to an end. A time between times, he thought. And the constellations whirled above like a pinwheel, making him feel dizzy. And then he shivered, and the stars stood still. How long had he been standing there? Even without a whisper of wind, the sub-zero chill cut through his core. He needed to move again, and keep moving, or he would freeze to death. The eastern horizon remained dark, without any indication of dawn. Not yet, but he did not check his watch because he didn't want to know. Not with such a heavy burden to bear, not with such a distance to cover. He knew the sunrise would soften the snow and ice, releasing rockfall and avalanches, and thermal winds would scour the vast south face, making escape a far more deadly endeavor than it already was. But Breck pushed those thoughts from his mind. He needed complete confidence and calm and resolve to descend this vertical labyrinth, for even a single shudder of realization could break his concentration and send him plummeting. He looked back from where he came. The snow upon the summit ridge was dense as concrete from the many gales that passed through day after day, year after year. And his footprints were nothing more than teeth indentations from the steel points of his crampons. But he could see them in the moonlight, so he followed them across the ridgeline, down the snowy apron, where he peered into the exit gully, a dark void of shadow. But it was the path he must take if he wanted to return to the real world. Did he want to? He wasn't sure before. But suddenly, he felt an urgency to move, to escape the mountain. So Breck clicked on his headlamp, planted both axe blades, and lowered himself into the darkness. When he felt secure, he reset his axes and lowered himself again and again and again. And by the time he reached the base of the gully, his calves were burning, and his mouth was dry and sticky. The head wall, so vast and vertical, glimmered beneath him in the moonlight. The cliffs and rock bands, the ramp he must cross, the ice ribbon, so brittle and thin, and the sheer snow slopes below. The terrain was too technical to reverse, with no room for error. So he chose a spot in front of him, brushed off the loose snow with his mittens, and chopped at the crusty surface until he saw the turquoise glint of hard blue alpine ice. He unclipped the lone titanium ice screw from his harness and began twisting it into the ice. Once it was seated, he immediately backed it out, thus coring out a tiny tunnel, and then twisted it into the ice again at a different angle to create a second tunnel to connect with the first in a V-shaped pattern. He fed his rope through the channel until he had 2 equal tails and tossed them over the edge. This was how he would get down, rappelling off ice anchors for thousands of feet. Leaning backward, Breck began gliding down the head wall, floating in space. When he reached the end of the rope, dangling in mid-air, he planted his axes in the frozen face and clipped into them so he could take his body weight off the rope and pull it down so he could use it again in the exact same manner. He patiently cored out another V-thread anchor, carefully balanced on his axes and crampons, relying wholly on those tiny metal points to support his weight, like a fly on a wall, until he fed the rope through the holes in the ice and could continue. He lost count how many pitches he rappelled, but at some point Breck lowered onto a snow-covered ledge, which was wide enough to stand, to catch his breath and refuel. He unslung his pack and took out a carbohydrate gel and his water bottle, and he clicked off his headlamp to let his eyes adjust to the moonlight while he ate and drank. This ledge looked familiar. Had he been here before, years ago, with Kyle? The water tasted good. The gel renewed his strength, and as he began to examine the ice for another place to set a rappel anchor, he heard a rumble. Something must have cut loose above him. He flattened himself against the cliff face as snow thundered down, tearing at his clothes, threatening to scrape him off the mountain, and all he could do was cling to the rock with every ounce of strength. Suddenly, the fury subsided, and when the spindrift cleared, he spotted a dim figure standing on the far end of the ledge, and the hair on his neck felt electric. He shined his headlamp at the figure, but couldn't believe his eyes. Kyle? He was wearing the exact same gear from 10 years ago. Insulated bib overalls, down jacket, orange goggles, thick gloves, and his blue helmet. The same blue helmet Nicky gave him. The same blue helmet that was now sitting on Breck's fireplace mantel in Quandary, thousands of miles away, on the other side of the world. Another world entirely, broken and battered. Without warning, bitter winds began to roar around him, raking the narrow ledge, pushing and pulling at his body with as much force as the avalanche. And again, he grabbed the rock for safety. Snow blurred the air between them, but he could see Kyle's expression, creased with desperation and fear. Breck tore off his goggles and rubbed his eyes. Was it the lack of oxygen at this altitude? A hallucination? A trick of the moonlight? But when he looked again, Kyle was still standing in the same place he stood 10 years earlier, racing to uncoil a nylon rope. And as his friend tossed the loose coils over the edge and prepared to rappel, Breck stared at him in disbelief. Instead of taking time to core the ice, Kyle simply wedged a tiny piece of climbing gear, a wired nut, behind a rotten flake of rock which Breck knew was brittle and hollow. It wouldn't hold his weight. Didn't he realize he was about to die? "Kyle, don't do it. We gotta get off this mountain," Kyle said. "Too dangerous." Breck heard his own words, but it seemed like someone else was speaking. It was the same conversation they had a decade earlier. "Help me chop a ledge. We'll sleep here until the weather clears." What about avalanches? Kyle said. We'll get swept off the face. We'll be safe beneath this outcrop. Too risky to rappel in these conditions. Kyle wasn't listening. If he only knew the danger. If he only knew what was about to happen. I'm going down. Wait, Breck called. Hold on. He was confused. He wasn't looking at Kyle. It was Jenny. Her long red hair whipped back and forth in the wind, and he saw the Quandary County Sheriff's Office logo on her coat, her 9mm holstered on her belt, her knuckles white as she clenched the rope. But this didn't make any sense. Snow blurred the air between them, yet he saw her expression, creased with desperation and fear. This isn't fun anymore, she shouted. No, Jen! She leaned back, the rope went taut, and the anchor blew. She was gone in an instant. In that same instant, the snowstorm vanished, like it never existed, like Kyle never existed, like Jenny never existed. Breck raced to the edge, peering hopelessly at the glacier, 2,000 vertical feet below, glowing peacefully in the silver moonlight, as in a photograph, unmoving and unmoved, as if nothing had ever happened.